Okay, everybody, welcome to our first class on the prophets. I'm going to tell you, this one excites me. I think this one's going to be very cool. And here's why. These are potentially the old, musty, kind of dingy readings of the Bible that we as Christians don't spend a lot of time on. And my hope is, as we dive into them, we're going to mine the information in there for really, really timely wisdom to what's happening right now. Because what the prophets were saying in 8th century BCE is so, so meaningful and apropos right now. And that's what we're going to find. So let me go ahead and share my screen and we'll dive in here, okay? One second. Okay. Okay, here's roughly how we're going to approach it. We're going to start with an overview today, looking at some of the prophets, what is prophecy and what it isn't, and why we're doing this. And then each week we're going to take on different prophets. And when we take on those prophets, we're also going to kind of look at what their main, I'm going to say what pissed them off the most and translate to that to what is going on right now in our life. So like next week, we're going to look at Elijah and Joel, and they were really furious about idols. And we're going to be looking at what are the idols in our life. The week after that, we're going to be dealing with Jonah. And Jonah has these really powerful lessons about Christian nationalism. So as we're taking on Jonah, we're also going to be spending a lot of time learning about Christian nationalism and how to counter that. And all of our questions for reflections will be dealing with that topic of the day. So we'll be dealing with the question for reflection around Christian nationalism. And then we're going to hit 4 weeks where we're going to hit the 8th century prophets, which are Hosea and 1st Isaiah and Micah and Amos. And they are some angry prophets, like really, really angry prophets. And a lot of times when you hear people say, I'm not a big fan of the Old Testament, that's the angry God, right? My hope is as we dive into this, you're going to understand why they are so angry. And they have very valid reasons to be angry. They're angry about things like the rich stealing all the land. They're angry about things like the 1%. They're angry about things like trade and the impact on the poor. They're angry about things like militarization, like and how much money is going into the military and how that's impacting the poor. So that's what's making them so angry. And that's why they use this over the top language. So as we come up against each one of these prophets in this really strong language, we're going to translate it to what's going on in our country right now. And then we're going to come out of that. We're going to hit Isaiah 2 and 3, and we're really going to grapple with the question of inclusion. And then we'll finish up with Ezekiel and really look at where modern day prophets are called to be, which I really believe is every one of us. Okay, here's today. We're going to cover a little bit of the Hebrew Bible 101, a little bit about Israel's history, because I think we got to really be grounded in that. And then we're going to talk about who the prophets were at the really high level. I'm going to give you an overview of who we're going to cover. And we're going to talk about why they mattered and why they might matter now. Okay. So here's the structure of the Hebrew Bible. And think of it as 3 buckets. The first bucket is the Torah, and that is the first 5 books. So the first 5 books of Moses. So Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. That's Torah. The second bucket is prophets. And that's where we're going to spend a lot of our time in. And these are a lot of the narratives, and it's going to span a huge time span. And in the prophets, there's a mix of sermons, there's a mix of history, there's a mix of poetry, and there's a mix of these really, really fierce warnings and messages of the prophets and from the prophets. So we've got the 12 minor prophets, we've got the big prophets, and we'll talk about the difference between them. And then you have things like Judges and Samuel and Kings in there. So prophets is really kind of a hodgepodge. It's not just the prophets that we think of. And then the third category is the writings. And this is really a hodgepodge, a really diverse collection. It's kind of like the miscellaneous collection of the library. Wisdom literature, history, you got the Psalms, the Proverbs in there, Job. Nobody knows what to do with Job. Ruth is in there, Lamentations. So 3 big buckets. We're going to focus on the second bucket. Now, the Hebrew Bible is going to span, the development of the Hebrew Bible is going to span over 1,200 years. So biblical scholars think that it began as early as 10th century BCE. So the earliest parts were written as 10th century BCE. And then it was, we're going to talk about the history of Israel, but when the Israelites went into exile in Babylon, that's when a lot of these texts were finally written down. The prophets, the section we're going to focus on, those were all finalized around 300 BCE. The Hebrew Bible was not completed until 2nd century CE, which is right around the time that the Christian canon is coming together. So they both came together kind of at the same time. So 1,200 years of development of this, multiple editors, so many editors, so many layers of editing. Okay, let's talk a little bit about some critical markers in Israel's history. The first appearance in the historical record is comes from Egypt. And it comes from a statement from an Egyptian pharaoh where he's talking about Israel. Israel lies devastated, bereft of its seed. That is the very, very first mention of Israel in the historical record. There is nothing in the historical record that speaks to the story that we find in Exodus. It just does not exist in either the historical or the archaeological record. So what is it then? It's an origin myth. And the Jewish people have constructed it. It has been redacted. It has been written and rewritten. It has become tradition, a beloved tradition, right? Now, the historical and the archaeological records do show that Egypt had control over the land of Canaan during this time. So this was an occupied territory of Egypt. So that these people that become the Israelites were under Egyptian control. So there's pieces of the story that really kind of make sense. Did they come out of Egypt? No, that story doesn't exist. Were they under Egyptian control as an occupied territory? Yeah, they were. So that's where the story may come from. So by about 1080, that's when the Israelites established their kingdom. And that's where we get this. This is where the historical record is going to differ from the biblical record. And in the biblical record, the kingdom, we're going to deal with David. That's where we're going to see David in the biblical record. And then right around when the kingdom split, it'll become 2 kingdoms, a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom. When that happens, that's when the biblical and the historical records start to line up. And it's the same story. So to the north, we've got Israel. To the south, we've got Judah. And this is what it looks like. Again, so to the north, you've got the kingdom of Israel. The capital is Samaria. And you're going to hear that word a lot when we get to our 8th century prophets. So when we dive into our 8th century prophets, this is the map that they're going to come from. And they're going to have a lot of things to say about Samaria and Jerusalem. And none of them will be positive. So Samaria is the capital of Israel. Jerusalem is the capital of Judea. 2 different countries at this time. During this time, tremendous political power, economic growth for both countries. The ruling elite in the state bureaucracy were the ones that benefited the most. So there was a lot of money, but that money, that economic surplus, really went to the ruling class. And it created this very luxurious lifestyle for the ruling class, for the elite. And it became a way of maintaining their political control. And all of this led to the deterioration of the peasantry class, who was the majority of the population. This is the ultimate 1%. 8th century BCE, we're seeing the 1%. And this is going to be the spark that's really going to set off the 8th century prophets. Okay, so this is where Amos and Hosea and Isaiah, first Isaiah and Micah, are going to come in, and they are really going to be angry. And these are the situations. This is the background context that's going to make them so angry. Okay, so then what happens in 722 BCE? The northern kingdom is destroyed by Assyria. So Assyria is going to come in, destroy the northern kingdom. Then, about 250 years later, the southern kingdom is going to be destroyed by Babylon. And then Persia is going to come in, and they're going to destroy the Babylonian Empire, and they're going to send the Jews back. And then the Persians are going to fall to Alexander the Great, the Greeks. And then there's going to be a time of kind of a little bit of independence, and then they're going to fall to Rome. So if you look at this time period, it is just a time of occupation, right? They are occupied by big empires throughout this. So this is to start with, this is the Assyrian Empire. So they come in and they take the northern kingdom, which includes Samaria, the southern kingdom where Jerusalem is not taken. So they remain distinct. This is going to become really important again when we go back to those 8th century prophets, because they're going to warn about this. Like, clean up your act, or this is what's going to happen. And it does happen. This is the Babylon Empire. It is going to really extend far. And you can see, like, Israel is ground zero in this expansion for all of these empires. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what happens during the Babylonian exile. And then we have the Persian Empire. Again, Israel's, look at, they're right in the center. The Persian Empire is quite vast, quite extensive. And then we got the Roman Empire. And again, they're a part of that. Okay, so this is the biblical timeline, and the historical timeline kind of overlapping. So the piece I want to come to is that red line, which is the conquering by the Babylonians, and where they go into living in exile. So we're talking about the southern kingdom right now. And what happens is the Babylonians come in and they take over the kingdom of Judea. And they take all of the elites, the scribes, basically a who's who of Jerusalem. And they take them all back with them to Babylon, and they're slaves. For those of you who are with me on the LGBT class, this was the story of Daniel. He was a slave who had to figure out how to live in the Babylonian exile. So they go and they live over there, and it's quite a long time. And the temple has been destroyed. So everything they know about Judaism has been destroyed during that time. And it is at that point in time that they start to write down these sacred scripts, right? So this is when they're going to write down the Torah. This is when they're going to write down Joshua to Second Kings, which is going to include a lot of the prophets. And it's this point in time that they become known as the Jews and their religion as Judaism. It's also at this point in time where there is no temple worship. There's no temple, right? So they begin to worship in Jewish homes, which become synagogues. So they're there for 70 years, for almost 3 generations. They're there in Babylon. And so when we come to, the 8th century prophets are going to warn about this. We're going to encounter prophets who are basically going to say, you got to clean up your act, or Babylon's going to come in and steal you up and take you back. We're going to encounter prophets who are going to deal with the repercussions of coming back to Babylon. So here's where they took them. So they took them out of Jerusalem and took them all the way into Babylon. And then they had to come all the way back, all desert. Okay, post-exile, what happens is the Babylonian Empire is destroyed and the Persians take over. And when the Persians sweep in, this King Cyrus II, he lets the Jews return to Judea, and they get to go back and rebuild. And the Persians managed their occupied territories very different. They wanted them to basically flourish, collect taxes, and send them back, but they were not allowed to have their own government. But they were allowed to practice their own religion. So the Persians at that time practiced Zoroastrianism, high tolerance for other religions. And so Judaism was able to go back and flourish, and the temple was rebuilt. This is the point in time where we're really going to deal with issues of inclusion, because there are folks coming back from Babylon who are not welcome, like the eunuchs. There weren't eunuchs before they went to Babylon, and now they're eunuchs that are coming back, and they're having to deal with inclusion problems. And so there's going to start to be issues when they come back about who's in and who's out. So we're going to deal with that in Isaiah 2 and 3. Okay, who were the prophets? They were not office bearers. They were not elected officials. They were not in any way interested in protecting religious honor. They were the ones who stood between basically God and the world, as kind of holding both of those, shouting out basically God's mercy and justice into those areas where complacency had kind of taken over. And their job was to expose hypocrisy. And most importantly, to remind the community of what they were created to be. That's who the prophets were. And it was really critical, because in all the situations we're going to encounter, the community had forgotten who they were and why they were created. Okay, you're going to hear the term the minor and major prophets. The only difference between them is the length of the book. It doesn't have to do anything with the power of the message. It's just a way to categorize them. So all it does is reflect volume, not significance. So the prophets are all going to deal with repentance, social justice, covenant faithfulness, but the major prophets are going to have more detail in them. That's all. That's the only difference. So here are the major prophets: Elijah, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. And we're going to spend devoted time on each of those 4. And then the minor prophets, Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah. Now the ones we're going to cover Hosea, Joel, Amos, Jonah, Micah. Those are the ones we're going to cover. So we're not covering all of them. There's just too much to cover on these. But we're going to cover about half of the minor prophets. There are 12 minor prophets. This kind of gives you a timeline of where the prophets come up. So the earliest prophets we are going to cover are Elijah and Joel, and then Jonah, and then Amos, Hosea, Micah, first Isaiah, and then we'll deal with the other ones. So we're going to take them on kind of in a chronological order. We'll start with Elijah and Joel, and then we'll move on to Jonah. Okay, let's start. Then we're going to do really, really high level who the prophets were. So these are the ones that we're going to take on. Elijah. So Elijah is one of the oldest prophets we're going to take on, and some of you might know Elijah for several reasons. He's the one that takes on Jezebel. So if you've heard the stories of Jezebel, that's Elijah. So Jezebel, again, comes into the kingdom. She's a pagan. She worships a Baal. I have some funny memes about this when we get to Elijah, so hold on for that one. And this is in the northern kingdom. He's going to announce a drought for unfaithfulness. And then he's going to get into this battle with 450 prophets of Baal. There's going to be this dramatic contest on Mount Carmel, which ends basically in him defeating these prophets and Jezebel getting so angry that basically he has to run and flee. So we're going to take on Elijah's story. Now, there is no book of Elijah in the Bible. Instead, Elijah's story is told in a lot of different books, in both the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament. So we have to pull it out of 1 Kings, 2 Kings, and then a little bit in Malachi. Elijah is also the one that you hear about. He's the one that always shows up at the Transfiguration. So you know that story when Jesus goes up to the top of the mountain and the disciples fall asleep and then Moses shows up? Elijah's always there. That's why. And the reason why is because of this verse in Malachi is that Elijah is going to return as the harbinger of the Messiah. That's why Elijah is always there at that transformation story. So there's no book of Elijah, but we'll pull him from other pieces. So again, his return in Judaism is the harbinger of the Messiah recovering. He is also recognized as a very significant prophet in Islam. He is going to be succeeded by Elisha, and we're going to talk about his role in that pass off. And like all of the prophets that we're going to deal with, there's going to be this basically call to accountability. Step 1, you got to stop doing this. Step 1. Step 2, if you do not stop doing this, this bad thing will happen. Step 2. Step 3, when you stop doing this thing, God is going to love you, right? And God is going to be there for you. So there's this, always with the prophets, this last one is really, really critical. This message of hope and redemption and faith that the prophets all end on. Elijah's really gonna, though, step 1, he's gonna deal with idols and idolatry, which makes sense because, right, he's taken on Jezebel and Baal. So we're gonna deal with idolatry. And what are our idols right now in our country? So that's what we're gonna be dealing with next week. Okay, Jonah. Jonah's going to be a lot of fun. Okay, so Jonah actually does have his book. He's a minor prophet. And here's the story of Jonah. God tells Jonah, I want you to go to the Assyrian city of Nineveh, and I want you to preach to them about wickedness. Jonah is like, heck no, I'm not going. And Jonah goes in the opposite direction. And in the course of this, Jonah is swallowed by a great fish. It doesn't say it's a whale, but we all think of Jonah and the whale, right? So Jonah is swallowed by this great fish and is in its belly for 3 days. And after being spit out, which of course you would imagine after you've been in the belly of a whale for 3 days and been spit out, of course you're going to change your mind. Yeah, right? He finally obeys God's command and he delivers the message to the Ninevites. And when they get this message, everyone from the king all the way down repents and changes their ways, right? And God forgives them. And Jonah's pissed. Jonah's pissed that God forgives them because Jonah doesn't believe that they deserve God's forgiveness. And he's frustrated that God's grace was extended to them, right? The message of Jonah is that God's mercy and compassion extends to all people, even those that are considered enemies. And God believes everybody has the chance to repent, right? Right? Here's what Jonah's going to teach us about Christian nationalism. Jonah is really actually a pretty scathing parody of nationalistic religion that speaks about wanting God on our side. And religion that cannot stomach the possibility that God's love can extend beyond our own borders, especially those that we consider our enemies. Jonah is going to encapsulate Christian nationalism for us. And so we're going to really use Jonah as a springboard to understand Christian nationalism in our country and how we're called to respond to it. Okay, Amos. You're going to love Amos. Yeah, I've really fallen in love with him. Okay, Amos was a shepherd and a farmer. And he's one of our, I think of him as our 8th century pissed off prophets. He's one of them. And he's a contemporary of Hosea, Micah, and 1st Isaiah. Think of him as one of those. He's one of the 12 minor prophets. Not a professional prophet, he was a shepherd, right? And he was an outsider. He came from the southern kingdom and he was called to minister in the northern kingdom. So a double outsider, right? And God called him to be this prophet, right, in this strange land. And now you're going to start to see with the 8th century prophets very similar themes. Demand for social justice, righteousness, compassion for the poor and the vulnerable. Amos is going to be really angry about corrupt leadership. He's going to be very angry about how the rich treat the poor. And we're going to really look at the manner in which the rich treat the poor that Amos is going to call them to accountable for. So, Amos is going to take on all of that. And he's going to basically really criticize them for religious hypocrisy. So basically, Amos is going to say, you cannot worship God over here with all these rituals and sacrifice, and at the same time oppress the poor and needy. That's offensive to God. And he's going to say it in way stronger language, right? So step 1, he's going to call them to task. Step 2, he's going to say, if you don't do this, is bad things going to happen? Step 3, right, is the last point. Despite that strong message of judgment, there's going to be this message of hope and promise of forgiveness and healing and a new beginning if you turn back to God. There's always that step 3 for the prophets. Okay, everyone knows this one from Amos 5:24. Let justice roll like a river and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. And here's mostly why we know it. Dr. King paraphrased it in the I Have a Dream speech. We will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. It's a very, very powerful statement. That is Amos. Okay, Hosea. Hosea is also one of our 8th century pissed off prophets. And he is going to come up during a very corrupt, very morally corrupt regime. And he's going to have a very weird story. Hosea is going to be married to a woman named Gomer, and she is going to be, throughout her marriage to him, incredibly unfaithful. And Hosea is going to use this as a metaphor, his marriage to Gomer as Israel's marriage to God, that they are both unfaithful. And so Gomer has multiple kids. She leaves him. She eventually becomes a prostitute, and Hosea stays with her through all of it, right? And because God instructs him to do that. And this is going to be an analogy of God and Israel. So Hosea's relationship with Gomer is going to be a kind of an analogy to Israel and God. Hosea means salvation. So Hosea is going to be one of our angry 8th century prophets. Idolatry, social justice, betrayal of that covenant with God. Because again, Hosea's marriage to Gomer is going to be the analogy of Israel's marriage to God, and the betrayal within it and the redemption within it. So that, you got what are they angry about? Step 1. Step 2, what's going to happen? Hosea is going to say, this does not happen. Then he's going to warn about the Assyrians coming in, and which will actually ultimately happen. So, and again, step 3, there's going to be this powerful message of hope and mercy and restoration of God's love. So this Hosea 6:6, Jesus quoted a lot. For I desire steadfast love and not sacrifice, the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings. Okay, that is Hosea. And we see that in the New Testament. Okay, Isaiah. Okay, Isaiah means Yahweh is salvation. Perhaps one of the most significant prophets in the Bible. Social injustice throughout Isaiah. Really calling out hollow acts of worship, and this hypocrisy of these hollow acts of worship. Isaiah is fundamental for both Judaism and Christianity. Isaiah is quoted so much in Christianity, most often quoted in the New Testament. Most biblical scholars think that there were 3 primary authors who wrote at 3 different timelines with 3 different distinct challenges. So we got 1st Isaiah, 2nd Isaiah, and 3rd Isaiah. Okay. And they're broken up. So 1st Isaiah is the first chunk, and it's going to happen within the context of the Assyrian Empire. And it's pre-Babylon exile, and we're really going to deal with calls for justice. First, Isaiah is a pissed off 8th century prophet. And that's where we're going to encounter them with Amos and Micah and Hosea. And this is one that probably looks very familiar to everyone. This is 1st Isaiah. Learn to do right, seek justice, defend the oppressed, take up the cause of the fatherless, plead the case of the widow. In one quote there, you've got 1st Isaiah. That encapsulates what 1st Isaiah is going to demand. Okay, 2nd Isaiah is the next chunk. And it was written as the Persian Empire is kind of coming up and the exiles are returning. And it's attempting to convince those exiles in Babylon to get back to Judea, to restore them, to go home. It's going to deal with questions of inclusion as well as reassurance of God's love. And there are biblical scholars that feel very confident that 2nd Isaiah's primary author was a woman. And here's one of the passages that lead him to believe that, Isaiah 49. Can a woman forget her nursing child or show no compassion for the child of her womb? Even these may forget, yet I will never forget you. See, I've inscribed you on the palms of my hands. Your walls are continually before me. That's the kind of over the top language you're going to see in 2nd Isaiah. Really, really beautiful reassurances. 3rd Isaiah, the exiles are back and there's conflict. And there's questions about who's in and who's out. And there's still questions about, are we going to be the faithful nation that God wants us in regards to justice? And so that's 3rd Isaiah. And this is pretty standard 3rd Isaiah. The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me because the Lord has anointed me. He has sent me to bring good news to the oppressed, to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives and release to the prisoners. Right? Like Jesus's marching orders right there. Yeah. So that's 3rd Isaiah. Okay, Micah. Now, Micah, y'all know really well. Micah's name means who is like the Lord. Micah is our last 8th century pissed off prophet. And he's another outsider, comes from a small village. And he's called to basically speak to both of the nations. And he had a very long reign. He's one of the 12 minor prophets. And he's referenced actually later by Jeremiah. He is really going to go strong against the wealthy and the powerful and hold them accountable for their oppression of the poor. And Micah everyone knows this one, right? Micah 6:8. What does the Lord require of you but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God? So we're going to encounter Micah with our 4 8th century angry prophets. And then the last one we're going to take on is Jeremiah. He's the latest prophet we're going to take on. And Jeremiah you think of him as the most unpopular prophet, really unpopular. Like they burned his scrolls. He was very dramatic. Like at one point in time, he wore a yoke to symbolize his submission to Babylon. He faced enormous hostility, imprisonment, beatings, threats of death, all for delivering his messages that people did not want to hear. And he was denounced as a traitor, widely hated. What he said came true, though. Babylon did come in. After the destruction, he remained behind, later was taken to Egypt. And apparently in Egypt, he was murdered because he prophesied that the Babylons were going to come to Egypt as well. That did come true. So we're going to deal a little bit with Jeremiah, but this is the one I think most people think of for Jeremiah. For surely I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord, plans for your welfare, not for harm, to give you a future with hope. That's a Jeremiah one that we usually rest in. Oh, and Ezekiel, we'll deal with too. Ezekiel is our latest one. And dramatic visions. Ezekiel was taken into Babylon at a young age. And Ezekiel, I really struggle with a lot of Ezekiel. Ezekiel is going to prophesize this true shepherd, this messianic figure in the line of David. And that is going to flow into the New Testament. One of the things that we see in Ezekiel is actually, for those of you who took the LGBT clobber passages with me, this is how we know that the story of Sodom and Gomorrah was not about gay sex. It was about hospitality. It was about not caring for the oppressed neighbor. This was the guilt of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters had pride, excess of food, and prosperous ease, but did not aid the poor and needy. That was the sin of Sodom. And that's how we find out it was in Ezekiel. So, okay, so those are the prophets we're going to deal with, and we're going to go in much detail when we get into them. But what is prophecy? The first thing I want to make sure everybody's clear is it is not predicting the future. Full stop, right? It is truth telling. It is truth telling for a very specific reason. Almost universally, what we're going to deal with is truth telling about social justice. It is calling those in power to accountability for their actions that are against God's call, right? So these prophets knew God, and they knew what God wanted, and they were calling folks to accountability for it. And this is my favorite description of the prophets. It's from Marcus Borg. God intoxicated voices of radical social criticism and God intoxicated advocates of an alternative social vision. Their dream is God's dream. Those are the prophets, right? So why did they matter? Thus says the Lord, stand at the crossroads and look and ask for the ancient paths, where the good way lies, and walk in it and find the rest for your souls. Jeremiah 6, right? That's the wisdom from Jeremiah. Dr. Renita Weems teaches this. Prophecy is not a cry from above, but a voice rising from among the suffering. It is a word spoken in solidarity, not superiority. The prophet names injustice, yes, but only walking alongside those who bear its weight. So you'll notice all these prophets, they didn't come from the ruling elite. They were farmers, they were shepherds, they came from villages, they came from the rural areas. Okay, so why do they still matter? So because prophecy is truth-telling and future dreaming, that summons still stands. It is perhaps no more critical than today, right? We need prophets today more than ever. We need truth-telling and we need future dreaming. Those are two things that are just critical in our nation and our world right now. We need renewed political imagination, a new reality where our leadership is measured by compassion, empathy, not control, where justice is not delayed by procedure or erased by pardon, where legality never substitutes for goodness, right? So that is what is so critical right now. Okay, I'm going to stop there before we go on into our question for reflection and just check in questions about that. That was a lot. A very high level of who the prophets are and why they matter. So questions, comments, reactions on any of them?
Is there a test?
Yes. I'm going to have you
remember all those dates, huh?
No test. No test.
Well,
We're going to dive deep into each one of them.
that's another psh for me, because I didn't know much about the prophets, but, hearing what each one said and was doing, it just ties in with then Jesus just took all of that and explained it in an easier way, right? I mean, I see the way and all the things the prophet said. It's very powerful. This is very
What you're going to see is Jesus clearly stands in the tradition of the prophets.
Yes.
Clearly stands in the tradition of the prophets.
Especially his tirade and, jumping up the tables and all of that.
Yep.
That's just like one of the prophets.
Yep. The prophets are table turners. Absolutely. Absolutely. For
Wow.
very, very justifiable reasons. Very justifiable. And we're going to get into them. Yeah.
Or she's gonna go turn up some tables in Minneapolis.
Okay, let me show you our question for reflection because I do want you to spend some time on it. So, okay, so the prophets really all had this similar theme of demanding justice from their leaders for the poor, the marginalized, and the oppressed, the least, the last, the lost, right? That was what they were passionate about. That's what they demanded. So the question then is, how are you currently leaning into that prophetic call to stand in solidarity with those who suffer from injustice and oppression at the hands and forces at work currently in our country. Okay. And I'll copy it and put it into the chat. How are you currently leaning into the prophet's call? And you know what the prophet's call is now, right? To stand in solidarity with those who suffer from injustice and oppression at the hands of the forces at work currently in our country. So let me go ahead and send you into some breakout rooms.